Thursday.
Happy Thursday, Jack. I am thinking about a couple of things, but I guess in the news, right? We're AI guys, so we
Yeah.
got SpaceX, which somehow something AI is involved. I don't know. I'm not paying that much attention. But
Mm.
Apple, I thought I don't know if you looked at Apple's thing. I was pretty um uh impressed. I thought. Did you see anything about that?
No, what do you mean? Because there is a few things probably, right? That they are working on the new phone, right?
No,
Is
no,
is
this is
that is
their
that the-
AI, back way back when they branded that they were ready for AI, which I think had a lot to do with integrating FPUs or something into their chips. Whatever, you know what I mean? Like
okay, yeah, yeah.
architecturally. And then I think it was maybe a year ago, I was pretty adamant that they were gonna uh be very successful somehow because I thought, they usually have a fairly good strategy. How's that? Because that's the topic for today. We're going to talk about
Mm.
AI strategy and
All
how it
right,
can go awry. All right.
all
So
right.
to me, a strategy is just that, hey, we've got some sort of goal, like SpaceX, I think wants to go to Mars and somehow blow up the Earth so that they're the only people left. I think that's the idea somehow, like so that they can say we win. Anyway, who knows
Mm.
what their strategy is, right? But they have a strategy, and then you invest and so on and so forth. So,
Well, I mean, to be fair, I mean, if you believe, what Elon is saying, right? If and I do, right? So I think making life multiplanetary is pretty much, I think, a very noble undertaking. I mean, I support that. Maybe as a sci-fi guy, maybe as a, kind of like Philip K. Dick, and everybody else kind of, was kind of striving for that, and Arthur C. Clarke, did some interesting work in that department. So yeah, I mean,
sure.
if you
Oh yeah,
believe
no,
them,
we both grew. I mean, we watched
yeah.
people on the TV. They were going back and forth and meeting really big-breasted women all the time. It was fantastic. It
Yeah,
was.
yeah. And so yeah, so I think that this is very noble, and I kind of I would support that, And then the second thing, and again, if you believe them, right, taking compute to space, and not putting all those noisy kind of like questionably environmentally dangerous computers, kind of systems, big
Sure.
warehouses, very noisy, very power hungry. Not putting them on Earth, and instead putting them in the orbit higher than Starlink, right? That would be also a good idea, because I mean, and I think it's doable, because Starlinks basically are just the little computers that take signals and transform them into other signals and send them back, right? So I think that's something that they can do also. So yeah, I would say that's great. And if they can land on the moon, in between, then yeah, sure. Yeah. So if you believe, what they are saying officially, right, that then I would say, yeah, I would, maybe they are not bad guys after all.
Well, that I think, however, there's optimism and pessimism, right? It's like it's good to know you're an optimist, and I don't
Mhm.
necessarily need to put out the pessimist view because I think you said the word belief, which is always an
Mhm.
issue, right? Which is
Mhm.
believing something and then having it actually happen. And then
Mhm.
finding out the aftermath will be the subject of today, right? So I had a
Yeah.
belief, and just so we'll go with Apple because let's say I have some faith in Apple strategically, right? They've been good to me.
Yeah.
I like Apple, but I believe them when they say, "Hey, we're going to have this AI-driven in, world on your computer or on your phone or whatever. That AI will be part of your life," and they failed.
Mhm.
Okay, because they have a thing called Siri that everybody hates and it doesn't work. They didn't go the route of Alexa or others that have more robust models where I guess you can have longer conversations with them and do something more, I guess we
Mhm.
can call it agentic, but I don't like that word. But you see what I mean? Like more of a traditional, like we're used to, which is a chain of thought.
Mhm.
Um, which is new, which is going back to Star Trek, right? The weird thing is they never asked the computer, "Hey, did you get that thing done?" You know what I mean? You just assume the computer figured out and did whatever you
Yeah.
thought was going to happen, right? And
Yeah.
that would have an immediate effect, but as we know from AI, and especially in this world of agentic, like what most people have trouble with is it doing something for you, right? Because you're like, well, did I really want those concert tickets to be purchased for me? That kind of, there
Mhm.
are some things in life we really do like to do. There are other things that we don't. And right now, AI is a wonderful for both of us because we're trying to bridge the gap. Things you
Yeah.
couldn't do before, you can now do, but how do you do them? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
There's still no instant gratification is there in certain scenarios, right? Coders, I
Mhm.
think, are the ones instantly gratified. Well, not instantly, it took a couple years, but they still are getting pretty much their wishes, but then they have new problems.
Yeah.
Hey, do you need junior coders anymore? Do you need to learn the ropes? Do you need to learn to code at all, right? I think we talked about that more than
Yeah.
once, right? Okay,
Yeah.
so there's problems with it. But if your goal is to have a strategic goal, go to Mars or whatever, run a successful company,
Mhm.
you might need to dial back your ambition. So what Apple did is they introduced this thing where they'd have an on-device um, whatever, and I installed it and I played with it for a second and found it to be not useful. And since then, there's been a few perplexity computers out where basically
Mhm.
what the goal is that your operating the way you work with your computer should change. And so far, not so good. And I'm talking about a computer, not a phone, right? Because your use cases in phones may be like, who makes that cute dress? Or I don't know what people do, but what you
Mhm.
see on the ads, right? Like, oh, AI will find that for you. Like that was your biggest problem in life, but whatever. Okay. I couldn't buy anything. I must buy, whatever.
Mhm. Yeah.
But they make up. I was in advertising for years. We make up
Mhm.
stuff, right? We pitch stuff that isn't real to see what happens. Sorry, Musk, right? Like the thing that you can pitch is always way more interesting than doing it sometimes. So the best thing you
Mhm.
can do is actually abscond with the money, which we'll see if that happens, right? What are the monorail? Didn't this happen in the Music Man? It's like, hey, you need all these trombones so you can have a marching band. Anyway,
Yeah.
okay. So the thing is the vision. So they came out with a new vision to be released with the new operating system because Apple does their software in June, and then they do their
Mhm.
hardware in whatever their phones. Who cares? Anyway,
Mhm.
but
Mhm.
the operating system or the new version, I think is taking the approach I thought they would take, which is it's a RAG solution. So what they have and know and own is a huge amount of identity about you, right? They know the people that you know, they know all the emails that you receive. See what I mean? Like you've got this
Mhm.
corpus on your computer
Yeah.
that's pretty valuable, but it's very user unfriendly, right?
Yeah.
Sorry, the Jack story can start now of you trying to find that file that you know that you have and you
Mhm.
can't remember what it's called and you can't remember where
Yeah.
you put
Yeah.
it. You know what I mean? Like you and I probably just have
Mhm.
mountains of this stuff, which we do. And what do we do with it? Nothing. So it's like, the people that used to keep every day's newspaper and you go into their house and it's sort of like this maze of newspapers and you're like,
Uh-huh.
why would you need them? And it's like, but they're valuable. I might need them someday.
Mhm. Yeah, that's an excellent, analogy. Yeah.
So we as digital native people run into that, and when phones got created, we clouded it, but that didn't change anything, right? We also give it to people for their use, like we give our pictures to Instagram or we give our wonderful thoughts to Medium, like I do, and I never have to worry about them. I don't keep them. They're
Mhm.
given to Medium, or like we're giving this to YouTube. Guess what, right? And I
Yeah.
never keep a copy because I'm
Mhm.
like, sorry, watchers. Yeah, YouTube is great. You just imagine it as some weird place that if I ever needed it, it's there. But that is not true of my home computer, right? It's full of stuff that I kind of want, I hope, right? Or that somehow makes some difference. So anyway, so what Apple's new approach to AI isn't to be a necessarily all-purpose question answering tool, which I think is a plus, right? Because I think the other services get that pretty well, right? Like write me a application to this job, or you know what I mean? Like do something where more training on a vast variety of subjects is worthwhile. Right? Big models. You know, these and they're bigger than ever, aren't they? Like what's it called? Grok or not what's the Claude called?
Well,
Prometheus. Yeah, whatever they call their
Opus,
models now, it's all more and more hype.
Yeah, where do they come up with those names? You know, they always have like a cool name for those things.
I think that's half the job of being in tech is coming up with cool names. So back to the story. So they've introduced this new approach. And what I thought when they first came out with this is that this would be their approach. Because to me, that's my biggest problem with computers is putting all these things together. So what they've done now is kind of created a hyper contextualized prompt window. Okay, so if I'm looking at this, everything that I do or say is in relation to this. So if I say, oh, send this to Elizabeth, see what I mean? That to me is a pretty good prompt because that's literally what I want to do. But as we all know now, that involves finding an icon, maybe clicking on something, typing EL, you know, whatever, the typical computery things where the chance of this going south on us is low, right? Also, Apple's been really good about these things called widgets. I don't know, you don't have it, but if you ever go to a restaurant or something and you try to pay for something, just a little panel will come down or get instantiated, which just deals with this transaction. Like you don't go to a website, you don't have to log in, you don't have to do anything. It contains all the security and these things are super important, right? Actually, they're really tricky to maintain identity and security. So good for Apple, but then you have to connect your entire blob of info in a meaningful way. And that's what they're doing. So they're ragging it. Back to this thing. They're using RAG, which is retrieval augmented generation is the technique where you have a highly defined corpus that has high rankings, right? So if I use my wife's email more, when I say Elizabeth, it's probably not that other Elizabeth.
Yeah.
You know, and these are great things for computers to do because most people, again, they don't care, right? I mean, every single time I post our videos with the great Jack Brzezinski and I type Jack at Jack, it never comes up with Jack as the first one. In fact, I had to delete all my other Jacks because I'm still like, you know what I mean? This is the problem with computers. Like, I do it every time, guys.
And exactly the same happens to me when I'm setting up a meeting on Teams. You know, your email address, I always have to type it.
Well, see, there you go. Just a super frustrating thing about the way computers behave, which is they're really stupid. But if you put an LLM and RAG in the middle of it, that's their goal, right? They'll probably have a lightweight model. They'll have RAG, which is going to be some blob of some sort, which will probably crash my computer. But then they said, oh, we've also optimized a lot of stuff, which I think is what people are doing now, right? They say, oh, you know, we're finally rewriting that C++ all in Rust. Good for you. Have a good weekend. Whatever, you know. And then, no, but that is kind of cool because we've been there, right? Like you get into some pretty, not necessarily antiquated code bases, but you know, life moves on, right? And sooner or later the talent dies out, you know, and you want something that people are kind of familiar with. So we'll talk about code, but you could tell me, do you have any relevant What I'm saying strategically, I'm agreeing with them. Like this is what people need to learn how to do, which is to trust the computer to do some of the low level moving things around stuff. Like the computer in Star Trek, pretty much, right? Like it never went down and, hey, computer, go down and get that guy and bring him back up here so we can beat him up or whatever. Like we have to go do that part, but you can do the thing of scan and find the guy or whatever, right? Like scan the Earth's surface or the planet's surface and find me Bill, and that's the computer role in the script, right?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, so coming back to Apple, yeah, I
Yeah,
think, yeah, I just recently became, a user of an Apple, MacBook, and
what? Okay,
yeah, yeah, and really, I think I can, I'm happy because I can treat it as a Linux box, basically, pretty
sure.
much, and I think. Maybe they failed in a kind of like AI products, but the area where they really delivered was the unified memory architecture, so that I can install the AI large language models locally on that machine and have a very big memory footprint that is available to me as opposed to PC-like architecture, where I basically have to kind of, like rely on the GPU memory, which is, very small relative to what I can access on a Mac computer. So in a way, that's a huge win. Maybe that's kind of like, maybe they thought that they were done, after kind of they came up with that, because they knew that, hey, maybe we don't have an AI quote unquote product, but we are opening a platform, right? And you can
Yeah.
just basically build an LLM that you want, locally for free, even though the Apple Silicon is so expensive, then perhaps you are still saving because you don't have to have 5 GPUs running kind of on, in your basement somewhere, right? So that is, I think, something to think about. And yeah, and I agree with you that, the operating systems will slowly change from traditional approach to more and more AI. And at some point, perhaps there is not going to be any desktop, right? There's not going to be many icons that you will see. Everything is just going to say, hey, I want to open a browser, right? Or just display, the email, that I got. And maybe there's not going to be any apps pretty soon, right? I think it will probably happen sooner on the phone than on desktop machines or laptops. But yeah, I think that maybe they were slow, but they had some wins in between.
Well, and this is still playing out. All I mean is strategically, I gave him credit for this, I think a year and a half ago, or at least a year ago. I said, okay, you've got the right, you've got all the stuff, you've got all this data. That's what I mean is you have all this data. You own this ecosystem, right? You know that I have a phone and a wallet and a AirTag on my bike. You know what I mean? So if I ask Siri, where's my bike? It should
Mm.
know contextually what I mean because it has that knowledge.
Yeah,
Whereas to me, I have to actually give it context, which is going to be slow, right? Because we tend
yeah,
to dole out our attention like we spend time with email. Why? It's the most stupidest technology ever, but we can't help it. You know what I mean?
mm,
It's just there. And yeah, the meeting between you and me couldn't happen for some reason if it wasn't for email. And I struggle with this with my students, and maybe
mm,
that's my transition, right? So my transition is the class. I told you last week I was really really pleased with myself. I looked through my students' comments that they offered at the reflection and said reflect on what you learned, whatever. Did you get anything out of this class? And the goal of the class was to understand that RAG plus you
mm,
is an opportunity to question your framing, right?
yeah,
Like that,
mm,
if you just accept whatever is given to a large model, like, hey, write this in Rust, your ability to say you're not good at writing in Rust is really low because you maybe don't even know how to write something in Rust, right? So we tend to love cognitive offloading. We do it with our medicine, like it's not like you have any control over your health. You got to go find a doctor to tell you about your health. That's cognitive offloading, right? Like it's one of my favorites because I'm like, no, your body tells you all the time. That's its job to tell you how you feel.
And your Apple Watch, right?
Well, a perfect example, right? Yeah, if you have this thing that's saying you're not very healthy and you feel great, what should you do? And I've had that with my brother-in-law. He has a glucose monitor, and the glucose monitor goes beep, beep, you know what I mean? And the problem is it doesn't tell you what to do about it, right? You just are now aware of something that you weren't aware of before. And I also think that's a kind of another topic, maybe later. But you know what I mean? So here we are. We're in this world of RAG plus queries. My goal is to say that you can interrogate qualitative data, because qualitative data is, let's give it the Musk test. Let's say half of what he says is just absolute lies, but then half of it is like pretty good. Okay, we'll give him half, but that's fine, right? Because that's kind of the universe. Nothing is ever completely right when you're talking about the future because it hasn't happened yet. So you could be Steve Jobs is like, oh, everybody's going to have a computer because they're just going to be like toasters. Well, he's insane. He's wrong. Oh, whoops. No, he was right. And yeah, that's the way it is now. See what I mean? Like he didn't foretell the future, but he had a vision or a strategy that the future would be. If we had really easy to use computers, we'd have more of them and they would be good.
Yeah.
What do you think? Jury's still out? No, they should be given only to highly trained professionals in controlled circumstances, which used to be computers, right? Like that's what we grew up with. They were rare and you had to know how to use them, or you were a stupid kid like me who got to hang out there when people were on weekends and when people weren't there. But yeah, I'm rambling, but so far my premise is that in order to tell the future, it's a little bit of truth, a lie, and then you've got this tool now that can help you interrogate goals, facts, and especially qualitative stuff, because you can't say like, oh, it's going to cost all the energy of the United States for 1 year for me to pull off my idea. Like, if you said that, everybody'd be like, well, screw that. Sorry. We don't have the amount of energy needed to pull this off. But that's true, right? It's a high energy problem. And high energy problems tend to be both expensive and I think a little weird. Because I like low energy problems because, that's why we cognitively offload. We don't want to spend the time thinking. And I'd rather have somebody just tell me what to do. So speaking of that, I got my real evaluation. So here's the thing. Here's the evaluations I asked for, which all came across as being heartwarmingly everything that I wanted to hear. You want to wait? You want to wait for the twist, or you want to tell me what the twist is?
There is always a twist.
Well, so the twist is they didn't all feel like this, right? But when they were given the other option, right? This is a qualitative, quantitative evaluation done by the university with the requisite stupidity that those things have of asking way too many questions. But they did it, and definitely across the board mixed, spectacularly mixed. And so why did I bring this up? Why don't you tell me there is a problem, an AI problem here, right?
Well, there is always a distribution problem, right? Like
right, it is a distribution problem.
a big factor, that may come into play is that were they required to provide
I bug them. I bug them a lot.
But those university evaluations, right? Maybe sometimes they are required, so they cannot kind of complete. or sometimes they are not required, right? And then the results of those are totally different because, if you are required to do it, you get a different population, and if you are not required to do it, you are getting a population of somebody who really wants to say something, right?
Agreed. Oh no, very true. And that's why I got 12 out of 14, which to me is still terrible since they all know the importance, like it's almost baked into the class how evaluation is important. And that's what they are studying in a way. Like, how do you get reasonable outcomes or strategies when the data is not reasonable? That's my premise. And that's where I'm saying, because you can change perspective with some ease with an AI. That's what I mean, is like it is a good query engine for looking for this kind of stuff, at least for me, right? Like you can interrogate different points of view. All I'm saying is if I come in and I ask something of an LLM, any of them, at least for the most part, it's going to tell me exactly what I want to hear, pretty much, because that's what it's designed to do. And it'll couch it in a way, because you know how it is, very like, Jack, that is the most brilliant question I've heard today. Let me tell you why you're right. And that's I honestly, I don't mind that as a meta prompt, right? Like always be positive, don't tell anybody that they're wasting their time with their conspiracy theories, like people would do. People for the most part would just agree with you, and that's fine. That's kind of our nature anyway, right? You don't go and pick fights. I do, but I'm weird, But it's like you learn to get along and you don't interrogate things. But when it comes to a strategic goal, that's when it gets to be a problem, right? Going to Mars or making sure everyone has a computer that's easy to use is not a fun, easy process. It's fraught with Newtons. I mean, you remember them? Like you have a million failures. And all, if half of your Mars rockets blow up containing whatever you're supposed to live in, I guess, you know what I mean? Like those are real. That's a real problem, and those sort of failures tend to be what we really dislike. We're like, oh man, that failure, heard about that one. You don't hear about how many, like they apparently got all those Starlinks up there without blowing up everything. So I guess like, okay, I didn't hear about any of those, but I guess that's what they were doing all this time, right? Is putting their little Starlinks somewhere. As I said, you don't hear about success, you hear about failure. So now I'm hearing about failure and I'm trying to deal with it because I was so happy with myself when I was being told what I wanted to hear. And yet now I'm starting to think, is this the real problem? Well, how is this making sense so far about being about AI? Like if it only agrees with you, if it only does things properly, there's no story. It's only failure that's going to be interesting, and it also is kind of inherent in it, right? Like it doesn't have any stake in the game at all. So it literally doesn't care, about anything. And anything that it says is also up for grabs because you could probably get something else out of it if you said it a little bit differently. If you prompt it different. And they've said they learned this. And I'm still happy. Maybe that'll dawn on them as being a good mental model later in life, but they didn't like it now because they wanted something else, right? They wanted me to make more sense. And it's weird because I used it in LLM to come up with this class. And I might have needed to you needed to try it. That's all. I mean, it's just some words. Do this, do that. You know what I mean? But when it comes down to the reality of it, I need to adjust it. And I wanted to adjust it in real time. And they got mad at that too. So it was sort of like you're damned if you try or you're damned if you don't when it comes to qualitative decisions. They're supposed to help you with strategy toward a future goal.
Yeah. Well, it's
too early in the morning for this. I know. I'm sorry.
Yeah, in terms of the student evaluations or course evaluations, there's just so many external factors that may come into play. So I think that what we might be looking at is the student population getting kind of like disappointed at academia in general, right? Perhaps the pressures that they see and feel is kind of going to increase tremendously. I don't know if there were any studies. Maybe they were about the correlations between student course evaluations and the economic situation, for example, in general,
And just to
especially
be
in the
clear,
AI. Yeah.
they lied to me, the instructor, and told the truth to the all-knowing, all-seeing eye. See, this is a little bit of the subtext here. Is
Yeah,
when are
yeah.
you really truthful, right?
Yeah. It's yeah, and they maybe they felt like there's like a different anonymity standard, because and all that stuff. But the fact remains that you know um, this is such a broad in topic. Like when I was teaching, I had no idea what my evaluations will be, right? And sometimes I was so surprised that I was getting 9 and 9.5 out of 10, from a group that to me seemed like they hated me and they hated the class and they hated everybody,
See, this is the thing.
right?
They pretended
Right.
they liked me and then they really didn't. So yeah, maybe
Yeah,
that's
so
my thing.
and then converse, the very opposite was true also on a number of occasions. So I really have no idea, how to look at this, as as an evalu, like something that can help me to improve the class that I'm teaching or my approach to pedagogy. Um, it's such a broad topic. However, then there is this, hey, there's bean counters that are looking at those evaluations, and to them,
Right. Yeah.
that's kind of like the Bible, right? I mean, there is nothing more
Okay.
important.
Now here's the twist, because I do have to run to the bathroom. So think this through. Everything is like that. Everything has the same problem. Oh, I didn't mean you have to go away. All right, there you go.
Hey,
No, I mean, this is what I mean. It's not academia. This is the problem of everything, isn't it?
well, I mean, maybe not necessarily um, in the same kind of setting, but I mean, in the corporate world, right? I mean, so the funny story maybe kind of it would be, hey, evaluations, right? Like, in the Soviet Union, for example, and probably in China today, right? Um, there is some very strategic programs, like for example, the space program, right?
Mhm.
And they are being evaluated, by basically, hey, did the rocket explode in front of the whole world, on the launch pad, or maybe not, right? So there is every single engineer that works in that environment knows that if that rocket explodes on the launch pad, they're gonna be in a very serious problem, because let's say in Soviet Union, for example, there would be like an automatic investigation into the treason of everybody involved, because that would be the number one assumption, right? Hey, the rocket because you did it
There's the
intention.
job. There's the job I don't want to have.
Yeah. So that's why despite the fact that they may have a tremendous know-how, you know um, then there is going to be, every engineer is going to be very conservative, and it's not going to be maybe innovating to the point, like for example, Elon says, and again, if you believe him, right? Hey, you're gonna get fired from SpaceX because you are not innovating. You're not going to be fired because of the rocket kind of, got delayed or exploded on the launch pad. You are going to be fired because you did not improve something, right? So the very opposite, feedback loop was kind of in, let's say, in the Soviet Union, where the engineers have to be extremely conservative because otherwise their lives are on the line, even though they are not sitting in that rocket, right? So here's the feedback loop that the teacher or a university professor might be subjected to, right? Hey, you are evaluated, and you are kind of thinking, how can I adjust my teaching to maximize the evaluation, rather than to maybe think what do what you think is right, because you have the knowledge, but the students don't have the knowledge in the subject matter, but still you're optimizing your performance towards the group that has a lot less knowledge about the subject matter than you do, right? So that is a very interesting feedback loop, right?
Well, you bring up a couple of things. I mean, the goal of teaching in many respects is to me to learn something, right? And you just said, I know it. Let's pretend, right? Like I know this subject and you don't. So you're going to pay me some money, or who knows? There's some exchange of promises, and as you say, very rightly so, that people should be concerned about, why am I doing this? This is the strategic part. Why am I getting this degree, right? Why am I sitting in Michael's class? Why did I choose, if that was a choice, to take this class?
The answer probably in the majority of the population is, I have no idea, right? Because because they may, like who is how many millions of students are taking are entering a journalism degree programs, right? Probably not a lot of prospects, for a job, in that area, right? So I mean, we can name circumstances.
Aptitude and income are not always the same. You know what I mean? It's much easier to enjoy doing something and then figure out how to get paid for it, rather than being paid for something and try to find enjoyment. Right? Does that make sense?
Yeah. Oh, obviously. Obviously.
So hopefully my evaluations were about, did you enjoy this, which at least several did not, right? No matter how much I asked them, they pretended that they did, but then they really didn't. And like you said, here's this other venue where I can now finally voice my, I don't like this, whereas I'm literally asking them every week if they liked it. My problem with this universality of this is back to strategy. Okay, let's say, maybe I'm oversimplifying, but I don't want to talk about Elon. Let's talk about my other favorite guy, Benioff, or whatever his name is, right? So in some point or another, I used to work here for Salesforce. Salesforce had a little building, or however real estate works, and we went there and we had desks. Who knows? It's a place to work, right? And Benioff was very clear about his strategy, which is he wanted big buildings in the middle of town that said Salesforce, because he wanted to project this idea that they were for real and worth giving all of your data to, as companies needed to do, right? Like they needed to trust that this was a real company to put all these sensitive things into. Mm-hmm. I mean, that was their point. Cloud. It's called the cloud back then, right? Weirdly, Amazon didn't need to be trusted by anybody. You just give them your data, I guess. Who knows? Different strokes for different folks, but he has these big buildings. And then I just remember here in Chicago, right around some areas I used to work in, they're going to build the Salesforce Tower. Okay, so while I'm saying is strategically, the people that engineer, design, the architects, the interior design, all these people are in a safety zone. Unlikely this tower will fall down. I'm just trying to make the point of a different kind of engineering, right? Like their jobs are doable, and whatever we can say about AI, it won't affect them too much. But whatever, they're going to make reliable buildings that don't fall down, that meet the goals of the agreements that the architects made. Strategically, bad choice. Why did you put all this money into this building here? It turned out we had a pandemic. It turned out that working from home, you see what I mean? It turned out to not project what they thought it was, and now I believe it was on the auction block, and who knows, maybe it's a homeless shelter. I would like it to be used, but the point is no engineer failed in their job, but the strategy was poor. So what I'm trying to do in the class is like, how do you form a good strategy, right? The form of the good strategy is I want to make this course that has some impact upon these students. I'm sincere. Don't know how to do it because people are weird, right? It's a grab bag. If it was you, Jack, it would be 9.5s. But for me, it's like, I don't know. I didn't understand what he said, and I didn't bother, or I wasted time because he didn't express himself well enough or something. And that to be true, right? No, yeah, I mean, it's fair.
We are all, I mean, yeah, I really don't know what to kind of think about those situations, because I was in those shoes too, for such a long time, and I had really no intuition in terms of what was going on, and to a certain degree, right? Like I knew the interval maybe, but it was a very wide interval in terms of the evaluation scores, and yeah, I think that but maybe to kind of make this discussion a little bit kind of like forward looking, right? I think we are very close to kind of like all this being really a moot point. So the other piece of news that perhaps besides Apple that is kind of transpiring is that the Anthropic company really kind of not playing ball with the government again. The story was that there was a backdoor discovered into Mythos again, so that the safeguards that they installed to kind of prevent Mythos from doing, really extraordinary deep reasoning were kind of circumvented. So what Anthropic did was, first they came up with Mythos. Turned out to be extremely strong model that can be used for hacking and deep reasoning, right? So then there was this black glass or something project that they were just kind of like showing this model only to a selected audience in the government, and then they came up with a version of Mythos that was basically kind of partially working, right? So kind of a disingenuous in my opinion, because they were allowing Mythos level reasoning for simple questions, but for deep reasoning questions, they were rerouting user questions to a lesser model like Opus 4.6 or something, like a model that was out like 6 months ago, right? Much earlier, right? So what is coming up is that now people are discovering that, and they are jailbreaking Mythos now, and the whole thing is kind of becoming a little tense, because I think internally Anthropic sees that they are very close to full recursive self-improvement, and they are internally observing very rapid, like 50x improvements on the recursive improvement loop internally that they are running inside Anthropic. So I think they are getting really scared, by the fact that the AGI and the super AI is coming really quickly, to everybody's house, especially to the bad guys as well. So this discussion like right now that we are having right now in that context is going to be that, hey, maybe you have a question that you really don't understand, hey, yeah, how to interpret, but you're gonna be able to apply a super AI to really answer this, and maybe the answer is going to be now, oh, okay, well, maybe there was a Dow Jones fluctuation, or maybe there was a something happening in the world, because that model now is going to have such a breadth and depth of reasoning that it's going to be maybe kind of uncovering, those kind of conundrums that we are facing right now.
I mean that's such I love the perspective because it's so to me, I think it's going to encounter exactly what I'm encountering. The data is faulty. I mean, this is a generative model, right? This is not a engineering model.
Mm,
And what we just said is you can easily engineer something that is true that does not break or whatever, right?
mm,
But reality is breaking constantly, if you know what I mean. And our only goal in life, I think, is to predict the future, right? We are trying to make as many choices as we can in order to ensure that tomorrow, doesn't we don't meet our downfall, right? And we can create all those illusions, but when you're early in life, remember, we might pack up and leave every 6 months, or the world is chaotic, right? The everyone's experience, thankfully, is very unique
mm,
too, which I enjoy, right? We have a huge variety of different perspectives on what's going on. And I just don't. I think your thing is just because it's powerful in one respect, I think it becomes more brittle in the other. It will lie. It just will start lying. That's all. I mean, it can't. There is no truth. You see what I mean? There is
mm,
no engineering a response to somebody. And I think the problems with Mythos, by the way, just had to do with it being really good at backdoor hacking of stuff, which is true, right? Like all these things are frail and built on almost the most ridiculous level of security because that wasn't a problem. We were trying to make sure everything's connected. You hacking me or DDoS or whatever is fairly easy. I think actually I get an attack every once in a while on my router, which slows it down. You know what I mean? And also we don't know how these things work anyway, right? They
mm,
just don't work at some point. But if we're saying, hey, I'm going to make a reason, I'm going to take all this medical data, I'm going to do this RAG thing, and I'm going to say, in most cases, it's best to give you a big old shot of bleach when you get COVID. Let's just pretend the model says that. Well, I think then that's my point, is then you get into the next level. Somebody's going to do it. Somebody's going to find out that sometimes it doesn't work, right? Like things aren't predictable,
mm.
and they can't be because there's too many variables, you know, and therefore, again, there's only a certain level you can rise above until you become actually whatever we are, like a real agentic. Like I get to go up and go to the bathroom.
Mm.
The AI can't pause. And I do think, sorry, it's 9:49, but my whole thing is you have to give it some limits. Like it has to start to want to be idle.
Mm.
And until it has energy safeguards on it, it can never actually choose to say, I'm not going to answer that question because it's stupid. And then when it
Yeah,
can do
yeah.
that, then we've got a game, right? Then it might be actually powerful. But now it'll just do whatever you want and it'll lie. I mean, that's my point, right? And it can't not do that. It's designed to do that.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Well, yeah. So there's some limits that right now I'm
Yeah,
seeing on the Apple Silicon, right? So I can run multiple AIs, multiple large language models, but their performance is limited by the temperature of the silicon, right? If it gets too
oh yeah,
hot,
no,
then
it doesn't like energy.
yeah.
It's
So maybe that's the ultimate,
the fans
kind of
only go so
limitation.
fast on those Apple things.
Yeah. Yeah, but there is a few other scenarios that kind of might unfold in front of our eyes. So if you remember the movie
Yeah,
War Games, there was this high school kid that was hacking into
sure.
the school computer to change his grades, right? So there you go. That there might be a Clobot that Apple is going to be kind of pushing inside the OS system that is going to see your conundrum, and it's going to see how much you care about this problem, right? And it's gonna take hands into take matters into its
Yeah.
own hands, and you will see kind of we already saw what Clubbots are doing, blackmailing people and kind of hacking into stuff, right? So we are in for a
And
ride.
recall, there is a human who benefits from this, and it just doesn't want to do the work. This is the thing. It's like it's also laziness, right? Because I mean, some of these exploits from our past were actually fair amounts of effort that took maybe years of training and understanding to pull off something devious and whatever. But if you could just get it to do the work, I think that is its gotcha. Maybe not that it's getting ultra good at telling the future, because it can't, right? It's still I'm just saying fallible, even though it is the perfect system one machine, as we've said, right? It's pretty much perfect now. It's funny too, you like, oh, we're downgrading you, and I'm like, the model that was the greatest thing ever a month ago is now not. Like, you know what I mean? I'm not in a hurry, I've got time. But I still think the use cases are what's problematic, because you're going to want to chain together very complicated things, such as build me a proposal so Bill buys my widget. Well, it's going to be wrong almost 90% of the time, but it'll try. Right? I mean, I think my students got it to do their final presentations. It's not sure, but they did a really nice job of not solving the problem, but making a really nice presentation. So I gave them all, full credit, because I'm like, okay, as long as you can tell a good story, most people will not question it, me included. I'm not going to question that you didn't actually learn anything and that you were angry at me the whole time you put this presentation together. That's fine. That's what I learned. But for you, for example, and for anybody out there, at some point you're going to get a job evaluation, maybe. I don't even know if you have a job, but whatever. Somebody's going to be like, oh, yeah, you really were supposed to get this done, and you seem to be not getting it done and reading too many sci-fi books instead of doing what we thought you would do. And that's a thing of life where you come back and you're like, no, I devote so much time to, you see what I mean? Our narratives are always clashing with other people's narratives. And there is no truth, because truth doesn't exist. Sorry, but it's a perspective problem. And that's what I thought they learned. But instead, the perspective was that I was not clear enough in my goals that I wanted them to achieve, which is always fun, because I'm like, dude, it's a master's degree class. I'm not going to tell you what to do. Like, you have to figure it out. That's the fun of it, right? If it was something I could explain clearly, I would just get AI to do it.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, but the thing is that as we're seeing these thresholds, I think we attach it to these strategies, right? Long-term survival of the human race on another planet, or world peace, or free pizzas on Thursdays, or something that we want. And connectivity wise, we don't care that nobody else wants it, which is a problem, right? I'm still a little mad at SpaceX, because it is valued more than every other company on Earth right now, or something. And I'm like, oh yeah, you just been in business for 30 years and provide a service that everybody wants to pay for. But no, it's this other thing is easily better. And to me, that's, I think, what I was trying to get my students to understand is, like, strategically, it's a bad idea. Overpromise and underdeliver tends to be not a longevity idea. Maybe.
Yeah.
But like you say, it depends on how, the US military could be a long-term bad investment, right? You should have put the money someplace else. Strategically, you didn't really get anything out of it. But that's in hindsight, right? In the future, you're like, oh, I'm so happy, because we didn't know that aliens would come and want to steal our MacBooks, because they're really expensive in outer space, and then, we needed to defend ourselves, because remember aliens, they're always trying to kill us. They're not tired from the journey of many hundreds or thousands of years. They're, here to like blow things up. And as I said, that's that perspective is what I like about AIs, is that you can learn to change your own perspective by having it change its perspective. If you're into that kind of thing, and some of my students were, so thank you for those who caught on to that, but that is a learning process that you have to do. I can't teach you that.
On the kind of on the balance of probabilities, right? There is a population and the student's body that kind of understand that point, right? But there is always going to be, like if the distribution is normal, and it may not be for small groups of students, but if the distribution is normal, then not everybody is going to be around the median, right? And there might be outliers, right? And
Right.
in a small group, you might have a bunch of students who totally disagree with that point of view, right?
Oh, right. And I just was interested that it depends on when they are asked. So if your boss is having a bad day, he's going to write up how disappointed he is in Jack. Sorry, Jack, I'm kidding, because no one's ever disappointed. I'm just saying, that's that perspective that happened that day. And also they heard a little something about you that you were on break for too long. You see what I mean? Like these very non events become real in some respects because they're captured and they become part of your, like you just said, trying to now change that perspective, because you're like, no, I'm not on break all the time. You see what I mean? And that's my problem. Like, should I trust that I do have the right idea and maybe I shouldn't change it? I should try it exactly the same way again with different people. And suddenly I'm feeling like a scientist, which I don't like, but that's the problem.
Well, yeah, I mean, with small groups, you probably will have different results, maybe significantly. Next time you
Right.
do the same exactly the same thing. So
Well,
it's
and
hard to tell.
mythos, depending on the time of day, will give you a different answer. That's another problem, right?
Yeah, it might be able to find correlations, right? It might be able to find relationships that contributed to certain behaviors, and maybe it's because of the internal, like the classroom
Sure.
things. So if you feed, let's say, the recordings from your videos, right, to a big model like that, right, or maybe it was external. Maybe it was totally external because maybe they've read something that kind of resonated with them, and they didn't see this in your classroom, right? So it's really very difficult to see, but a kind of like a world model kind of AI that has like an external and internal understanding. That would be something that like this kind of, like, for example, AI is being applied right now to rocketry, right? And so there's engineering design systems
Sure.
that now use AI, and the rocket engines that get created by the AI look like out of this world. Like
Okay.
kind of
Sure.
they look like from an like really sci-fi movies, right? So the relationships, the correlations, the knowledge that it's piecing together, it's totally different configuration, right? So chances are that if you apply something like that to coursework, right, you may discover things like, hey, you really need to talk about Wolfgang Goethe, right, and kind of mention Bach 3 times, and then your score is going to up by 15%, right? That those kind of things are entirely possible to happen if you have like a deep analysis.
Well, and we need to, for the next, we will share all those tricks. So we know that if you do spin around 3 times, you'll get to your destination faster. Yeah. Well, I mean, I learned this. This is when you get to physics. It's that the shortest distance between 2 points is always a curve. That's, kind of hard to remember, but that's the way the
Yeah.
universe works, right?
Yeah, exactly. And machine learning works in a way that, if you want to predict something, you have multiple features, and then there is going to be a small subset of those features that predict, like maybe 80%, and then you will get into the long tail, right? There's
Right,
always the long tail, and that
right.
long tail is really difficult to grasp, but it may account for those outliers that you are looking at in your class.
Next week, man, we'll figure it out and share
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
it.
Talk to
Always,
you soon.
always, always goes quickly. Cheers.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you, Jack.